Information meeting for the City of Rapid City for Wednesday, the 21st of May, 2008. Maggie, can you take the roll, please?
Johnson, Weifenbach,
Here.
Weicker, Hadcock,
Here.
Olson, Okrepke, LaCroix,
Here.
Kroger, Chapman,
Here.
Hurlbut.
Thank you. We have one item on our agenda today, and it's a presentation of the Utility Systems Master Plan. And having said that, I'll turn it over to Dan Kuhn, and he'll introduce our host of city and guest. We sure have
Well-
enough of them out here. I heard Karen Olson's comment as we walked in. I won't repeat it, but I heard it. So, Dan, the floor is yours.
Well, her question is still open for debate, but thank you very much for taking the time today to come and hear about and the status of the Utility System Master Plan. For some time, the city has been working on developing this Utility System Master Plan for its water and wastewater system. The master plan project is substantially complete. We have received many of the deliverables for this project. What we would like to do today in the time allotted is not go into detail on everything that was done as part of this plan because it's very extensive, but instead we'd like to give you a brief overview. Most of you or none of you were involved in the day-to-day process of the project like we were, so we'd like to again remind you what some of the objectives and benefits of the plan were, and then go through and identify some of the key tools that were developed as part of this project. And during the course of the presentation, you're going to hear that terminology quite a bit. That, to me, the focus of this project was development of the tools that will be necessary for the city to continue to properly manage and plan for its water and wastewater system, both the expansion and the existing system. So you might get tired of hearing that, but a lot of what we are doing here is developing the vehicle that will allow us to go down the road in the future for our water and wastewater systems. With that, I would like to introduce some of the project team members. For those in the audience who I have not met, my name is Dan Kuhn. I'm the city's project manager for this project. Also with us from Burns McDonald is Mark Lichtwart. Mark is the project manager on their team, and we'll be doing most of the presentation today. But we also had some great work by some local team members, mainly Dan Ferber and Dave Muck with Ferber Engineering did some great work for us on the sewer side. Dr. Perry Ron provided his often insightful and somewhat different point of view on a lot of different things for the hydrology. Al Foster with FMG, Zig with Banner, and Dan Berkey was instrumental in helping us know and his vast knowledge on water rights that the city of Rapid City has. So I'd like to again thank all of these project team members as part of our local crew. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Lichtwart, and he's going to go through the body of the presentation. I assume that this being somewhat of an informal meeting, if a question comes up at some point in time during the meeting, please feel free to ask it, and we have enough of the team members here today that we probably can get you a pretty good answer. So with that,
Dan,
Mark.
I'll just ask a question right off the bat. The presentation that you're going to show, if you could have copies maybe given to Kay so we can have them in the box of council members, we'd appreciate that.
We will do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, and appreciate the opportunity to be here today. As you all know, this is a project that's been in the works for some time, and we're very excited to be a part of it. We think that this certainly sets Rapid City in the right direction and provides a lot of the tools, as Dan said, that you'll need in the future for planning. So some of the topics that we're going to focus on today, we'll discuss just briefly the project goals and objectives, talk a little bit about our master planning approach, get into some of the data and assumptions, and then the majority of the presentation we want to focus on the development of those tools and how those tools can be used, and then we'll get into some recommendations and we can have any discussion that you would like to have. I'll start off with the goals and objectives. Typically, when a community does a master plan, what you end up with is a report that goes on a shelf. Everybody reads it, it goes on a shelf, and 2 weeks later it's out of date because you've got a new development going in somewhere, or just the fact that everything is so dynamic. Our goal here was to develop a real-time master plan. So you'll have something that's continuously up to date. It obviously needs to be kept up to date, but 5 or 10 years from now, you're still gonna have very useful tools that can give you very accurate projections as to what's needed in the long term. The development of the tools, you see the tools listed there, the geodatabases, hydraulic models, and computerized maintenance management system. I'll spend quite a bit of time on those. And then the centralizing the existing data really is one of the goals. And I'll talk about that first, the centralization of data. A lot of times there's a lot of institutional knowledge. A lot of times you have different databases, and what you find out is there are a lot of inefficiencies. You may have a database that the management, or I'm sorry, that the maintenance crew is using that's different than what another department within the city is using, and you end up with inconsistencies and inefficiencies. So the approach that we took on this project is to have a centralized database, and we'll talk about how those were developed. But that database can be used for all of the items that you see here, and the items that are circled in blue are the items that we focused on for this project. So you'll see that we have a hydraulic modeling client, a GIS client, so everything ties in directly with the city's GIS. We'll have a maintenance management client that the maintenance crews can use, and that's also very valuable information for planning, which I'll talk about. And then even the design client, so when a new design project comes into the town or into the city, it can be immediately put into the database and then used for the hydraulic modeling and those types of things. So this is really the core part of the project, and this is what makes it a real-time master plan. So the first step was really to collect the information, analyze the information, to identify the planning area and look at what are the water demands and those types of things. This here, and unfortunately the slide isn't showing up quite as good on your screen there as it does on my computer, but this shows what we identified as Tier 1 and Tier 2. Tier 1 is the immediate planning area, and Tier 2 is an area that I guess we identified as more of a regional planning. And for the planning period that we're looking at, which is out through 2030, the majority of what we're looking at is within Tier 1.
Mark, before we move on, you have a question?
Yes?
Mark, going back to the previous slide, how did you decide what was Tier 2 and what was Tier 1?
Yeah, we looked at the city's current service area. We looked at various potential wholesale users, and mainly looked at where the majority of growth is. And we took a lot of the existing information that growth management had. We went into Meade County and looked at zoning and looked at some of the different land use plans that they had available, and made those decisions kind of concurrently, just working with the city staff.
So for example, the northern boundary, is that a creek, which is why it's so crooked?
Yes, if you look at the straight line, oh, I'm sorry, you're talking about the red line up top.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because that's a northern boundary, correct?
Right, and we also looked at where are the watersheds and those
Okay.
types of things. The green line that you see on top of Tier 1, that's generally, or basically, the county line. So we only had a small part of Meade County included in Tier 1. Now, from that information and all of the information that was provided by growth management, we looked at population projections, and you can see we have Tier 1 and Tier 2 projected out to 2030. And we're looking at, within Tier 1, we're at about 103,000 in 2030. We then use that information based on, we did a pretty extensive analysis, looking at historical water usage, looking at potential wholesale users, looking at existing wholesale users, and developed what we think will be the projected water demands in 2015 as well as in 2030. And it's important to point out that obviously the water demands throughout Rapid City are not, they're not consistent as far as what someone would use, say in the middle of the summer if they have a big yard and they're having to water versus someone who may be in the center of town. So we did look at various demand factors and looked at where the water is used, or the majority of the water is used throughout the city. And certainly the southwest part of town, where lawns are quite a bit larger, that had a much larger peaking factor, is what we call it, than like the area you would see, the green area, for example. So it was important to take those water demands and actually allocate them properly throughout the city. We did the same thing with the projected sewer flows, and we actually did some actual field testing, which John will talk about in a minute here. Now, the three planning tools that I mentioned, the geodatabases, hydraulic models, and computerized maintenance management system, I want to go into quite a bit of detail on each one of those, because this really is the foundation of what we've developed here that you'll be able to use for many years to come, and really provides the tools for planning. First of all, the geodatabases, there are three different geodatabases: land use plan, water, and then wastewater. And the hydraulic models, we have two different hydraulic models, and again, one for the water, one for the sewer, and then I'll go into more detail on the maintenance management system. Okay, so first of all, on the geodatabases, the land use geodatabase, what we did, I mentioned we collected information on zoning and all of the information that growth management had available, and put that into a geodatabase where basically what you're looking at here is each plot of land that's a different color has a different use. So it was important to identify residential, commercial, industrial. Obviously, all of those types of land uses have different water and sewer demands. So it's very important to know how each piece of land is going to be used if you're going to be doing planning. So, and it was a pretty extensive effort to go through and make sure this was as accurate as possible. That information was then used in combination with both the water and sewer geodatabases. This here gives some information on the water distribution database, and we approached the water and sewer a little bit differently. On the water side, the city had very good water maps, good information as far as where each valve is located, where each pipe is located, that type of information. So we took basically all of the city's existing data and started building the geodatabase from that. And it, as you can see, we have about 392 miles of water mains, over 9,000 valves, 3,500 hydrants. So it's a very extensive system. In building that database, you see some of the data listed here. It's important not only to show location, but we need to know the diameter of the pipe, the material of the pipe, the fitting types, any information that you have. And the way these geodatabases are set up, they're set up so that if there's something you want to add in the future, whether it's 6 months from now or 2 years from now, you can easily add that to the database. So that's where it becomes a very useful tool, and will sort of be a work in progress, for many years to come. That just shows a little bit of a blow up, and you can see that if you look at that, you'll see that we actually, everything is tied in location. We can put aerials over it, and you can actually see where every single valve is. It's very easy to identify, for example, if you have a water main break, which homes are affected, and there are a lot of things that you can do with the database, as I mentioned, since it's a centralized geodatabase. Now, on the wastewater side, the city did not have a lot of good information available, particularly on elevations, which are very, very important because sewers are generally gravity systems. So what we did, Ferber Engineering, Ferber Engineering was an instrumental part of this. They actually went out and surveyed every single manhole in town, and it was about 6,800 manholes. Dave Mock, who was here, led that effort and had about a dozen people out for 3 or 4 months surveying everything. And in addition to surveying every manhole, they pulled the lid on each one and took invert elevations of the pipes. So we have a lot of different information. So, and I'll show a little bit of that on the next slide. But we do have, for each one of those pipes, we have diameter, material, inverts, depths, length of pipe. So there's a tremendous amount of information that went into this geodatabase as well. And the 6,800 manholes, as you can imagine, that's a pretty large effort. So, and this database is, it's the same. I mean, everything obviously is tied, with location, so you can identify exactly where each manhole is in relation to streets and homes and those types of things. On the hydraulic modeling, which is the next tool, and this is a very, very important tool as it comes to planning. I'm going to turn things over to John Gray and let him talk about that. John is a senior engineer with Burns & McDonnell. He's an expert in master planning, and he led the hydraulic modeling effort on this, so I'll let him go through these slides.
Thank you. On the hydraulic modeling, the first thing that we needed to do was select which software package to use. There are a number of software packages that are used across the country, and the process that was set up involved city staff in making the decision, involved reviewing the available model packages, determining a short list with cities' help, and actually having the three most popular vendors come into the city and have a workshop to pilot each of the different software packages. And the selection was a company called MWH Soft that sells programs called InfoWater and InfoSewer, which I think that one of the main reasons why those were selected was that they're very excellent connectivity to the geodatabase that was being developed. As Mark showed on the slide that showed that the entire project is data-centric, both of our models, the water model and the wastewater model, are developed directly from and intimately tied with the geodatabase. Both models include every pipe that's in your mapping system in the model. The water model was simplified to eliminate short dead-end pipes and skeletonization process, but all the pipe length that's the main lines is in the model. And the wastewater collection system, every pipe, every sewer and manhole in the system is in the model, so it's very comprehensive. One of the key things is calibration. Models are for the purpose of developing hydraulic, showing how the system operates hydraulically, and so calibration to ensure that they really reflect how your system is performing is really essential. So early in the project, one of our first modeling type tasks was to set up field programs. And on the water system, we did a pressure monitoring program. This map shows locations. I think the red dots, triangles, are places where we installed temporary pressure monitoring gauges across the system. There were, I believe, 11 of those, and the green dots are locations where we physically went out and operated a hydrant and took careful pressure and flow measurements. And if you see how they're distributed across the system, all the different pressure zones of the system. This data combined with the operating data from your SCADA system and from the operating logs maintained at the treatment plant on which pumps were operating at different times over the pressure monitoring period and what the water levels in the tanks were, that allowed us to indicate exactly how the system was operating across the system and use that for the model calibration. It also let us calculate in each pressure zone what the daily demands were and actually what the peak hourly demands were, and to determine how those peaking factors vary across the system. I think you had a graphic up that showed the different pressure zones and different peaking factors, and there's a wide range in Rapid City between certain areas that have a very high peak demand and other areas that have a low peak demand. Similarly, on the wastewater model, we wanted to know as best as we could how the flows vary, flow parameters vary in the different parts of the system. So we established a short-term temporary flow metering program where we installed flow meters in the line in key manholes. This map shows basically the manholes that they were at. Each one of those locations isolates an upstream tributary area that covers your entire system. I believe there were 12 flow meters that we monitored for a period of a couple of months, plus we had the information from the treatment plant and some rain gauges. A separate data report on all of the flow meter data was submitted to the city, and then we used this information to determine flow parameters for base flow and infiltration and rainfall dependent inflow, stormwater dependent inflow, that we could use to both calibrate the model and give us some different patterns by the different parts of the city that were appropriate to the condition of their system. That information led into the model itself, and as we said, the model is built from the geodatabase. This is a screen of some of the data on the sewer that was brought into the model. All of this is an example of information that, is both graphical and tabular. That's used to drive it. So I think the key thing is that ties back to your mapping system. This is a presentation of the sewer model of the entire system, showing that the entire system is included. And then, since it's a ArcGIS graphical type environment, that level of detail can be, we can zoom in and look at different areas of the system like this. Or even this is a view of the water model at the water treatment plant. When we've created hydraulic analysis with the model, then the person doing the modeling, whether it's me or a city engineer, later, as you're using it, can go in and view the hydraulic results of different conditions that have been set up. This particular screenshot is near that's your water treatment plant, is the colored dot in the center, and in this case it's just annotated with those are the flows on the pipes, are the red dots, diameters on the pipes are shown. If you wanted to show any number of other features, that's all available in the software. Once we have the model constructed and then have conducted some calibration analyses for both water and wastewater, we went ahead. Our first set of analyses evaluates your existing system capacities. We're looking for existing deficiencies, overloaded sewers, stressed pipes, identifying areas where maybe the pumping capacity was not adequate for the current conditions. And then we established models for our design years of 2015 and 2030. We have flow projections for it. Established a grid of improvements, mains to service new developments for both those areas, and conducted future analyses that were loaded from the demand projections that we'd made that are tied back to the land use and population projections. Included changes in wholesale demands, and conducted core analyses for both programs for those two design years to determine our capital improvements program. And I believe there's screens on the capital improvements program later, so that's my last slide, right? Okay.
And I'll mention that we did just turn over the models to the city staff, so they're in the process right now of becoming more familiar with those. And it's, I mean, obviously we have a time limitation here, but I could go into a lot of detail on the hydraulic modeling, some of the other components as a part of that. It's all outlined in the report if you get a chance to look at that. But the critical facilities, for example, were identified, as well as some discussions on how to provide water to those critical facilities in certain circumstances. So, there's a lot of information there. But again, the most important piece of information to take away from this is you now have the tool that any scenario that can possibly come up, you now have a good engineering tool to evaluate that.
Mark, we do have a council member who has a question. Karen Olson.
In regard to part of your data is emerging from the land use plan. And the land use is still a good guess at what the use is and the number of people that are going to be using it. As we revise those numbers, based on, because in 2010 there'll be another census, I guess. Does that sound correct? So then, when you go beyond 2010, as we change our best guess, that's still the database, that those numbers can be plugged in and they would still be pertinent to what you're doing. So with changing numbers, you still, that's possible with this plan. That's what I'm hearing. Am I correct in understanding that?
That is correct. And actually, you hit it exactly as far as the advantage for the centralized database. Everything is tied to the GIS. So anytime anything is changed in land use, those types of things, it will be a trickle-down effect, and it will go into the all of the geodatabases and the model. And there will be some work along with that. Obviously, people will have to look at how peaking factors may have changed and some of that. But overall, that's the concept. Yeah.
So we're not left with just whatever our present figures are as better information emerges and our best guess is better.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Those changes could be made.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I think that's the big advantage. We actually call this always planning instead of real-time planning, but that's the big advantage of the always planning, because everything changes. I mean, 2 months from now, the land use plan will be different, your, growth plans are gonna be different, everything. So that really is the whole advantage. And it's the whole concept of trying to minimize the effort to keep this up to date is, that's a very important part of this, so.
Thank you.
The last tool that we developed is the computerized maintenance management system. And just got a few slides to cover briefly, but just as an overview, I mean, maintenance is obviously a very important and can be a very costly part of activity for any city. And there are 2 types of maintenance. There's preventative or proactive maintenance, and there's reactive maintenance. And for preventative, for example, a valve exercising program, if you exercise valves, they tend to last longer. Hydrant flushing programs are good for water quality and other things. And reactive maintenance is if you have a main break, for example, or some type of an emergency out in the system. So it's important to have an efficient process to be able to address both of those items. So what we did here is implemented, it's basically a system that allows the maintenance staff to manage all of their activities. And basically, when we started this process looking at the maintenance management system, we looked at literally hundreds of different software packages on a preliminary level. We narrowed it down to just a few. We had several come in and provide a presentation as to what their benefits are. We had a matrix set up to kind of look at what are the goals for the city and what's important. And in setting up that matrix, what we did was we had questionnaires and interviews with several different departments within the city and actually looked at their workflows. So if there's a pipe break, what's the process you go through to get that repaired? And what we found out was that there were quite a few inefficiencies within the city where maybe there was one workflow that one group was using, another workflow another group was using, and so we tried to be able to utilize this system to make, improve efficiency among the different departments that might use this information. So we ended up with what's called CityWorks. And I'll give some of the summary and benefits. And I have, if you were interested, I do have some slides that go through and show screenshots and everything, but I didn't want to bore you with that. So some of the summary and benefits, it does utilize the centralized GIS data. So if there's a water break, it basically is identified based on the information that's in that centralized database. It does improve efficiency for proactive and reactive maintenance. For proactive maintenance, for a valve exercising program, you can actually put it in the schedule and it will pop up on, September 6th, we need to go out and do some valve exercising in this part of town. One of the most important features, it does track labor and material costs for maintenance, which I think is very important. If you have a area of town where you're having a lot of water breaks, at the end of the year or whenever you want, you can actually go in and do a report and find out how many hours did we spend fixing pipes in that part of town, and how much did it cost us. And maybe you'll find out that it's more cost effective to go in and replace that pipe than it is to continue maintaining it. So it's got some very, very valuable reporting capabilities that can be used for planning purposes. And I think the most important thing is reduced long-term maintenance costs. By being proactive, you always can save money over being reactive. So that's the last of the 3 tools. I wanted to talk about the obviously
Mark,
the capital.
before we move on,
Sure.
just a question about the maintenance. The company that's providing that software, that infrastructure to do that, are they a local company? Are they outside of the area? Do we have to make a phone call to, how does it work if for some reason that infrastructure that we're using to do PMs should break down?
They are, they're a national company. They're not in Rapid City, or they're not local, but they are a very responsive company, and that was actually one of the things we looked at. We wanted to make sure that 10 years from now you're going to have good support. And CityWorks, or Azteca, it's a company that's being used by, or it's a software package that's being used by many very large communities. So it's one that we would expect them to be around for a long time, and the experience has been that they're very responsive.
Okay, we do have a couple of lights on. We'll go to Alderman Ron Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You just answered part of my question, but you had mentioned other communities are using this preventive maintenance software. Do you have names of those communities that are?
I could get those for you. Unfortunately, Brian Claxton, who many of you know, who headed up part of this effort, he had a family emergency, wasn't able to be here, but I can talk with him and get that information for you. I can certainly send you some information.
I had a couple
I'll
other
do that.
questions.
Sure, go ahead.
My other question was, you talked about identifying overloaded sewers and stressed pipes. This maintenance program, does it take those into account, that I mean, I'm assuming that you found areas of maybe water pressures where we have opportunities, and maybe overloaded sewers that maybe we have opportunities. Does the preventive maintenance program look at those items, or is that something we look at?
Actually, the hydraulic modeling is more important for that, and that's what I'm gonna go into next year, some of the capital improvement projects. But yeah, between the hydraulic modeling and the, you know, if you find out you have a stressed sewer and it ends up as a work order in the maintenance management system, it's something that the staff will be aware of, but it will also be picked up in the hydraulic modeling.
But we've identified some of those areas already, and that'll be, okay.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, in the report, there are a couple of really good figures that actually, I've got those coming up here, but I'll direct you to those figures, and it shows all of the areas of town where we've identified that projects need to be completed by 2030.
Oh, awesome, thank you.
Sure.
Next, we'll go to our Public Works Director, Robert Ellis.
Just to discuss the CityWorks software, one thing to point out is that the city is looking at going with the citywide application of this. Airport has a need to do asset tracking, maintenance management as well. They'll be looking at using that software. Growth management through their permitting process can also use this CityWorks. So we're looking at implementing this across all departments, which it will be a nice feature because we will be on a centralized platform that all departments can communicate with one another. So just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Councilmember Deb Hadcock.
You probably knew this was coming, but on private water and sewer lines, does this kind of target and show some of those water and sewer lines and problem areas?
It doesn't, we made a decision in doing the modeling that assets that were not owned by the city would not be included in the modeling. It does, however, show at the connection point to, say, any wholesale users or anything like that, it will show if there are issues there, because we take into account, you know, the demands and loads within those areas.
So basically, it will help that by knowing where to put that that water main in that area, so.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Sure.
And then, I appreciate everything, the staff and the employees and everybody who's helped on this, because for decision-making up here for infrastructure on water and sewer, the facts are always good. Sometimes we have to kind of guess because some of the records and the different things, it's hard to, and it's not even always guessing, they're just trying to make their best guess estimate on what's happening. So this is gonna make it more efficient, cost savings wise, it'll help us save time. And then, and again, it improves efficiency, and this is awesome. It's what we've needed for a long time, and a lot of council members up here, and they believe that infrastructure is very important. This is one of the steps, so thank you, and everybody who's worked on this, you guys are awesome. Thank you.
Next, we'll go back to Councilmember Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question was for Mr. Ellis. And you'd mentioned that we were looking at maybe expanding this CityWorks program across the board. Have you guys had an opportunity to experience this in an environment that it's working in?
Bob?
I know that our utility maintenance crews have been using it for quite some time, and they've actually are seeing the benefits already with the program. It's very user-friendly. It is helping them do their tasks in a more timely, efficient manner. I believe Growth Management has had a test run of their permitting process. They're from what I've heard, very pleased with what that product can provide to them. I know that our IT department is actually the division that's spearheading this effort, and we have somebody here that can maybe give you a little bit more detail. But I think really many of the departments, Parks and Recreation is excited about this, the airport, Growth Management, Public Works. I'm sure there's a few other departments that I'm missing there, but it is something that we've looked at in quite some detail on that. I believe Jim may be able to help with that.
Ron, do you have a question for Jim?
Yeah, I guess I'd pose that same question. Sounds pretty exciting, but I think once you get into an environment where you find someone else is using it, you can see obviously opportunities that or pitfalls or whatever may happen before you bring something on, and all of a sudden you find out it doesn't work. So if he has some experience with it,
Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can also answer a previous question for you. Where I came from in the city of St. George, they did the exact same thing 3 years ago. So when I came here and found that the water department had selected, it kind of confirmed their decision, but it also made me very pleased to know that they were making a good choice here, because it worked very successfully in St. George, Utah. They had been using it for about 3 years when I came up here. But also, to answer some of your other questions, I'm not exactly sure how many of them are using the water portion itself or developed it for a water system, but like Robert was mentioning, it can be used for multiple. And I know, for instance, the city of New York City is using it to manage and maintain their tree program, including Central Park and everything. So it's very diverse. Oklahoma City is using it for about 5 different areas, including their airport. I can give you some more specifics, but those are the ones I know of myself that I've talked to, and they've been using it for about 6 years in those areas. So I hope that answers your question, but I was very, very pleased to see them, the decision that they made, and concur with it. It also has been put into the CIP. So it has been funded already, and we're negotiating the purchase of it right now because Growth Management is anxious to move on their permitting.
Ron?
Well, thank you. Thank you. It seems
Mark?
to be exciting, so.
Okay, I'll move into some of the capital improvement projects. John had mentioned that once the hydraulic modeling, or the hydraulic models were developed, we looked at the existing system as well as the 2015 and 2030. It was important to identify all of the different types of projects that may come up, and you'll see the project types identified here. Improvement projects are essentially projects within the system that improve the condition of the system, but they're not related to capacity. Expansion development projects would be related to capacity, and then a rehabilitation project would be replacing a pipe that, for example, you've determined needs to be replaced due to water breaks or something like that. Once all of these projects were identified, we prioritized them depending on obviously which ones needed to be done first based on where the growth was occurring, those types of things. We then developed cost opinions for each one. And obviously these are very budgetary cost estimates at this point, since in many cases we're looking out to 2030. The figures that I'll direct you to in the report, it's figure 6.4 and 8.2. This is figure 6.4, which actually shows all of the projects that were identified for the water system. And without going into a lot of detail, the projects are broken down by different color coding. It's a different type of project. And you can see there are quite a few projects. This is just in one small area of town. And every project through 2030 that we foresee is identified in the master plan, in the master plan document. This would be a similar figure. This is figure 8.2 for the sewer collection system. And again, you'll see this actually shows part of the north end of town where you can see there's quite a bit of additional sewers going in. So if there's anything you're going to focus on in the report, I would suggest maybe looking at those 2 figures. Now, the uses of the capital improvements plan, obviously, as we talked about, I mean, things are going to change as you move forward, and some of the prioritization and those things will change as the growth plans change. But the information that we've developed at this point can be used. It gives a good order of magnitude. It can be used in the utility rate study that the city is currently undertaking. And it can also be used in the development of a 5-year capital improvements plan. Now, we had several additional deliverables outside of the tools and the CIP program that I wanted to run through, and these are all very important as far as planning and efficiency within the city. Water rights planning, obviously very important. It doesn't do you a whole lot of good to put in water infrastructure if you don't have the water to deliver. So we did, under phase 1 of this project, we did a pretty extensive review of the existing water rights, and under this phase, basically looked at applying the demands that were developed to the water rights, and all of this is being provided under a separate technical memo. We determined in working with city staff that some of this is, I guess we would consider it somewhat sensitive information. So all of that will be available to you under a separate tech memo. And the one thing that did come out of it you should be aware of is that there is a recommendation that there should be a staff member within the city who is assigned essentially to handle water rights issues as you move forward. Now, second deliverable, we did some scanning of as-built drawings. The reason this is important, the city, you can imagine the number of drawings. It was over 35,000 drawings that the city has. And they were located in, some were out at the water reclamation facility, some were here in this building. And it was important to scan all of those and get them in one place just to improve efficiency. So everything is set up now where the drawing packages are tied to road center lines. You can actually go in and click on an intersection or a pipe and actually pull up the drawings for that if there was a recent improvement. So everything is more readily accessible. That should definitely improve efficiency for the engineering staff. And I should mention, that again is an example of something that's going to be an ongoing process. I mean, every time a new design project comes in, they'll have to get the drawings scanned and get them attached to that database. Now, the last item we're going to talk about, the policy and ordinance review. We did do a policy and ordinance review as it relates to public works projects. And I'm going to turn it over to Ted Kelly. Ted is a senior analyst with Burns & McDonnell, and he specializes in financing and policies and those types of things. So I'll let him cover our recommendations here.
Thank you, Mark. We did review Rapid City's policies and ordinances for public works, in particular titles 12, 13, and 16. We've reviewed information that had been prepared by city staff, and then we also went and collected information from other communities that are facing similar issues, dealing with system growth, other issues that are important here, and how those communities in particular are dealing with those issues. And one of the things that we can look at very closely in the area, it happens that some of the communities along the Front Range in Colorado have some similar issues and have been addressing things. So we developed some recommendations for certain key areas. In particular, I want to focus today, one of the things is reviewing we recommend that Rapid City conduct evaluation of the water and sewer rate structures as part of doing the current water and sewer rate study. That really should be completed. There's some issues there that could be addressed in how the rates are designed and signals that you're trying to send to your customers. We feel it's important that you consider implementing some specific language regarding development density within the community, some requirements that would be part of the plat review process. That would help in planning, and it would help in the development. So you should address that, particularly in some of the design standards that would be brought forward. We also recommend that you would evaluate implementing several policies on a case-by-case basis as they apply, with making sure they meet with the overall city goals and with the master plan goals. You could offer some things to customers, rebates that would influence their water usage as you address issues as far as how they use water and how efficiently and effectively they use water. You may offer rebates for low-flow toilets or for high-efficiency washing machines or irrigation controllers for watering, lawn watering. We'd also consider looking at time of day or time of year irrigation restrictions. So if you have situations where you need to control the water that's being used because of what's going on within the system in total, you'd want to be able to have some control over that. So there are other things that we looked at, and those are included in the master plan and some information regarding that, but those are the key things to be looking at.
Ted, we do have a question from Alderman Ron Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question would pertain, this is a summary of, I'm assuming.
Yes.
So when we talk about water and sewer rate structures, are there, in your plan, in this master plan, are there suggestions? Or is it something you're saying we should look at the water and sewer and come up with our own suggestions? Or I guess I'm not quite
As
trying to draw a
part
bridge there.
of the rate study, there's some things that can be in the actual rates that are designed to effectively recover revenues, but also to address some issues as far as sending signals to your customers, whether you'd want to have some type of water conservation rate, things like that you can send. And we have some information as far as a couple of suggestions in the report that should be considered as you complete the study right now.
So they're more detailed in the report then?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Back over to Mark.
And some of that information you'll see in the report. I think there's some good summaries of what some of the other communities are doing. That certainly, as you look at your options, may be very useful. One of the last things we wanted to talk about, and it's always a topic of discussion with the master plan, and that's how much information do you share and with who. And I think it's important as you're moving forward with this, for the city staff and the council to determine will this information be publicly available or who will it be available to. it's a tough issue with vulnerability assessments. You're all aware of that, with, some of the more recent security concerns. It's always a balance between security and right to know. We've made a few recommendations, and I think the city staff will be providing additional recommendations to the council. But I think that's going to be very important before you go and put the master plan on your website or something like that. So I just wanted to mention that. And then lastly, before I turn it back over to Dan, I just wanted to mention and commend actually the city staff. I think this has been a very complex project, and it's been one that has required a substantial amount of coordination with all the city staff. And we've had monthly meetings where we've had 15 or 20 people in the room, and we've got, of course, with Dan Kuhn as the project manager, but John Wagner, Dave Van Cleve, and Stacy Titus, and we've had Jim Bell, and Bob Dominic, and just a large group of people. And if everyone hadn't responded quickly and timely with the information that we needed, and if there hadn't been excellent communication among city staff, it would have been a really tough project to get done. And we've completed it on schedule and on budget. So just want to commend all of them. So turn it back over to
Mark,
Dan.
we do have another
Oh, sure.
council member light from Councilmember Hadcock.
Just a question, Mark. Do you have a suggestion from how other cities work their plans? Do
I
the
can
master plans?
provide some
would
information on
help.
that. Typically, they really don't share it with anyone unless there's a need to know. And if there's an engineering firm, for example, doing a study in a certain part of town, and there's a reason for them to have the model, then they would share either portions of the model or the entire model. But I think a lot of it, is based on, trust. Obviously, you're going to select an engineering firm that you have confidence in. But I think it's kind of on a need to know. And I think that's probably a good approach moving forward. Obviously, every community is different and has different needs, but that would be probably our recommendation. And I know Dan is working on some different agreements that you can actually have people sign, as they take the information, so they're essentially bound to not share it with other folks. So
Thank you.
that's
And I
probably a good
appreciate
idea.
that as a council person, because sometimes when you bring stuff up here, the public needs to know why we are or aren't doing something, so we're doing it for the right reasons and for safety of the citizens. So we appreciate if we have either examples or the reasons why, so they know why this is not going to be distributed, or maybe parts of it can be or can't be. So thank you, sir.
Sure.
We do have another council member light, Councilmember Olson.
When you're talking about contain sensitive information, Mark, tell me what what you mean when you're talking about sensitive information. I mean, are you talking about bomb throwers, or are you talking about, just give what the various things are that, when you use that term, what does that mean in terms of your approach to this
Well,
issue?
I think it's important. This is essentially, it's a map of your infrastructure.
Sure.
So exactly what you're talking about. I think for security reasons, it's important that you don't put information on your website or something that somebody can pull up where they say, okay, if I take out these 6 pipes in the distribution system, this part of town won't have water or something, So that would be the biggest concern.
So you really are talking about those larger security. When you say security, you're talking about someone who could damage the system or something like that. It's not, okay.
Certainly.
I think I understand what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
Anything that would fall under the vulnerability assessment, whether it would be, a water quality issue or any kind of a terrorist threat or anything like that. I think those are the main reasons why you try and keep these things secure. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think that I'd like to just add to that response is, it's not just the terrorists that we all think of that can come in and do damage to our infrastructure, but it's also just a vandal out looking to have some fun, or somebody that wanted to contaminate something. We don't want it to make their lives easier to go out and damage this, but it's something we've been talking about through the course of this project. Is we're developing some great tools and some great information that the public, mainly engineering firms, developers, those types of folks, you need to know, but yet how do we balance that with keeping our systems secure? And we don't have an answer right now, but we will bring forward some recommendations in the near future on how we think we can best distribute this. Well, this is the
question?
last slide to kind of show you about where we think we're at now, or where we are at on this project. I feel that we're essentially have taken step one. We have spent the course of this project developing the tools that we've presented here today. Some of those tools we have had for some time. The CityWorks computer maintenance management system we implemented about 10 months ago. Chip Petrick and his crews have taken that system to heart and have put a lot of work in developing that system to make it work. So we're well on to way of learning how that tool works. The geodatabases, since we're lucky to have a strong geodatabase and GIS department here to help us, we have had those for some time, and we are in the process of updating them as new information comes in. The models, as Mark mentioned, we just received the last component of those. We have received some training for those items, but all the training in the world will not make you a water and sewer modeler. It's experience that tells you how those systems work and how those models work. So it's going to take us some time to learn how to use those systems to our best advantage and to serve our customers and give them the information they want. So a lot of these things are brand new tools to us. So one thing I would ask from the council members here today is a little bit of patience. Well, you have this new tool, I want the answer right now. Well, we can get you an answer, but we got to figure out how to make the system work for us and work in the best way. But as time goes on, we think that we'll have some very efficient tools to use and to help the city, not just this year, but for long into the future. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time, and we can continue to ask questions if you have anything.
To Alderman Lloyd LaCroix. Karen, did you have a question?
Thank you, Ms.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh. I'll come to you next.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had the pleasure of sitting through the utility rate selection process with Mr. Kuhn, and a lot of the questions that were asked today, I know you asked, and they're going to coincide together. I guess what I got out of this the most is our frontline people. When you mentioned Chip, you know, kind of the response that you get back on that, the preventative maintenance, and I was just curious to how well that works with our frontline people, if it's working well, what kind of comments they had back, because I really feel that preventative maintenance is help us out in the long run to see where we need to spend our money, and maybe we can make things work longer or replace them before they do break. But they are working together, aren't they? The utility rate study and this program are going to all coincide together.
Yes, there is information that we developed as part of this master plan, mainly the capital improvements. How much money do we think we need to spend on capital improvements in the future? That will be part of one component of that utility rate study. So this information has been provided to our consultant on that project, and so they'll incorporate it. We'll work with them and move forward on it. Yes.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah.
Next, we'll go to Karen Olson.
Thanks. A number of times you talked about prioritizing. Prioritizing is difficult. And have you created criteria that is a part of what you're doing so that we have a list of criteria as we take a look at how you prioritize something as a part of this program? Because if it's just, sometimes prioritizing becomes pretty arbitrary. And within the framework of setting priorities, are there things within the tool that help establish what those criteria should be and the line of significance of those criteria in prioritizing something?
No, we did not specifically say these are the criteria and this is how this will work. The model itself can only identify improvement and potential expansion projects. Potential expansion is unfortunately somewhat reactive in that we're not always, it's hard to predict which way will the city grow, and at least now we'll be able to, if it grows the way we thought it would grow, we have some idea of what our needs will be as far as water and sewer infrastructure. Yeah.
Excuse me, I just wanted to add to that. One thing that you will find in the report, however, though, we did identify trigger points for different projects. So when, for example, a pipeline reaches a certain level of flow through it, that's when you would start looking at maybe replacing it or upsizing it. So there are trigger points in there. So, which I think is, sort of falls along that lines, and that information along with the model can be used to prioritize, so.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dan.
And I guess one more component of, when we say prioritize, for the improvement types of projects that say, okay, at some point in time, you've got to go from an 8-inch to a 12-inch line here. So we have prioritized those relative to each other, that we think this project should go first before this project, because unless you do this first project, there's no reason to do the second project. So it's helped us prioritize things in that way.
Next, we'll go to Robert Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up on that priority listing and what was actually done in this study, and point out that it's very difficult for staff to say the number one priority is let's go west or let's go north. So instead of doing that, we just laid out kind of the roadmap for growth in all directions of the city. If we go east, west, north, or south, what needs to be in place to support that growth for all of those areas? The direction of which area needs to grow first is really a council decision. We just provided whatever decision you make, this is the infrastructure that should go in place, and that's a part of what you'll see in this master plan.
Next, we'll go to Alderman Ron Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'll take the opportunity to thank everyone here for coming today. I'm glad I showed up today to get this very valuable information. We talked about priorities, policies, and procedures. I'm not so concerned about some of the infrastructure where it lies and all those things, but I have a vested interest in the priorities, policies, and procedures in some of the suggestions that have been made. And is that going to be available to us, Dan?
Yes, that was something I wanted to point out, and thank you. There are two copies. This is the hard copy of the master plan. It's not a huge book, but we're trying to get into this century and get everything electronically done. The two copies of this are in the council chambers or the council room here, and if you want, I can get you a specific copy. Again, until we talked about how this gets out and who gets it, I didn't want to attach a copy of this document to the agenda here today, but I can sure get you.
Yeah, my concern would only be the basically there was a slide up there with basically talked about policies and procedures, things that they had mentioned. That the other part of it, I have no time for that.
That's great reading. You ought to,
yeah, I'm sure it is, and it's probably over my head. So
I'll get you a copy of that specific section. I believe it's section 12 of the report.
They made mention of leapfrogging things and utility rates, and that's directly, I think, the council's responsibilities at some point, helping match the staff's priorities and the city citizens' priorities. So
Sure.
if I could get that piece of it, that's all I'm interested in.
Okay,
Thanks.
I'll make sure you get that.
And thank you guys again.
Next, we'll go to Alderman Lloyd LaCroix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess some of this is my fault, Dan. I'm not quite sure how this all works, but this computerized maintenance management system sounds like a great deal to me. I mean, it seems very important. And I guess I'm kind of curious to how that works. Is it spit out a work order when something needs to be done at a certain date, so then you can give it to Chip and say, hey, this pump, like for our pump stations, we need to service, whether it's the valve or I don't know if you guys do the oiling, if there's any oiling, that type of maintenance that needs to be done on them, so that they're maintained throughout. So we can, if we ask for the information, what kind of maintenance has been done, you can pull out a page and say, on this date, all that's done. Does that sound fair?
That's exactly one of the ways it works, is in the preventive maintenance side. It is labor intensive to set up all of those standard work orders, but once they're set up, Chip and his supervisors can then identify, okay, on tomorrow, he can print out all the work orders today for tomorrow, here's what you guys are gonna do tomorrow. 6 months from now, he can schedule to go back and do that permitting maintenance again. He doesn't have to worry about it, it's in the system. On that 6 months from now, it spits it out. When they come back, they can update the information as to the equipment they used, how long it took them to do it, what materials they used, so that they can track those costs that way. And then on the reactive type of maintenance where, say, a water line breaks in the middle of the night, his crews can go out, the next day he essentially gets that information, creates the work order, and tracks his costs, tracks it where he had the break, and puts all the data into a central place so that if somebody comes and asks, how much money did you, or time did you spend fixing water line breaks last year? He has that in one spot and he can collate that data. Again, part of that system is the time it takes to build that database up. You know, they've really been into it for 10 months, but they've really been using it hard for probably this year. And so, but over time, I think that database will get developed and get used a lot more. And his crew, again, I'll emphasize, he and his people have worked very hard. It wasn't a plug and play thing by any means. Developing work orders and service orders and all of that data took a lot of work, and they stuck to it and have really embraced it. And all the feedback I get from them is that they are very pleased with this system.
I just got one more comment. So he'll be, and you guys scanned all the prints for water and the sewer, so like if he's out in the field, he can grab his laptop and he can look up and see if something's going on.
Yeah, he, and I wanted to correct, we didn't scan all the drawings the city has. We had the ones that had water and sewer components, which was maybe 30 to 35% of all of our drawings. So we still got a long ways to go, but we're still scanning and going through those and getting them attached. But Chip and his crews also have those geodatabases loaded upon their laptops. And so when they go out, if they're trying to find a valve in this corner and you know, before they get there, they can know, okay, to isolate this line, I need to close this valve, and that valve. And our hope is that one day when the city has citywide wireless internet access, they'll be interacting with the server here downtown and it'll all be instantaneous data.
Great, thanks, Dan.
Next, we'll go to Councilmember Hadcock.
I was writing my points down. I've been excited about this master plan for a long time. A lot of people know that infrastructure has been one of my things and one of the goals of the city as well, but it's easier than to go to that lift station and go to these different areas when we can just base it on facts, not in having to go see everything. So you made a lot of our jobs easier doing this by this plan. So it also saves us time. And it also shows us where the priorities are, because we've been asking that. That way, based on those priorities and based on informed decisions or informed information that we get, we can base it on facts instead of before. Again, that's where I was going when we were making our decision on some of the infrastructure or some of the reservoirs or where should we go next. We're basing that on what kind of what you guys were saying a little bit, and then where we were going. So without being too mean, with trying to not stop the growth, but actually make a good growth decision and where that growth should be, this is an awesome plan. So again, I thank you, and it makes a big difference for me and others on making those decisions, and for council members, I think, that are really interested in infrastructure. You've done the right thing, and I'm excited about it. So thank you, Dan, and again, thank you for everyone who has worked on this. You just made our job and your jobs easier as well, so thank you.
Next, we'll go to Alderman Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the respect of everybody that's here and the time constraints, with the questions lead to more questions, and it's exciting, but you have this in place right now and you're working with it, and is that correct assumption? Or
Yes, some of the main components, as I said, the CityWorks, that's been in place. The geodatabases are in place. They're continuously being updated. The models we've just received, and I would not say
So the modeling's gonna be.
It's brand
gonna
new,
be touch and
it's
go.
something we need to learn and.
So as we go and obviously with anything you put in place, you know, there's gonna be times of frustration, but to be able to, you know, solve problems when we get a break and things, and then say if it doesn't exactly work that way, we still have the opportunity to go in there and change that and go, okay, so the future, if this happens, this is, correct those types of things and.
That was exactly why we moved this way, because Mark mentioned before, our water and sewer systems, we had a good representation of them, but they were all on pieces of paper. So what we did is once a year, we had somebody sit down during the slow summer months, update those pieces of paper, those drawings, and then make copies, and then hope that we got that copy to everybody who needed that information so that they had the most up-to-date information. With geodatabases, this is all computer-based. It's just like essentially an Excel spreadsheet. If you want to go in and add another column into an Excel spreadsheet, you can go in and do that. You can also go in and say we have identified this pipe as a PVC pipe, and Chip and his crew goes out and digs it up and says, no, that's really cast iron pipe. We can get that information back, we can update it within the system. We don't do that daily, but periodically we have a working copy, and periodically we take that working copy and make it the main copy, and then everybody has that same information that wants to get at it.
Have you had the opportunity to see the work order system in place in another city? I hate to use the travel word, but I'll use it. Travel to another city to see.
No, we did not.
You have not, okay. Do you think that would be beneficial to you, or just throw out a
I think
question?
it would be beneficial to the frontline users, yes. One of the things we are gonna send Roy Cork, who's our GIS coordinator within the engineering division, to the user conference in June, the CityWorks user conference in Utah. So that, Roy is one of the frontline guys that helps the utility maintenance guys. He administers a system, whereas they're the day-to-day users of the system.
And then I got one last question that you may attempt to answer, but how do you see the council fitting into the role in facilitating this plan with some efficiency? Maybe you haven't thought about it, and that's fine too.
Well, I think you hit on it some with the section towards policy and direction. That would be what we would look to the council for.
Thank you.
Next, we'll go to Karen Olson.
I have two questions. Do you see additional training necessary? It sounds to me like frontline employees are going to be asked to do additional kinds of things, and are we then going to have an obligation to do training or more training to make people comfortable with what they're doing on the front line in terms of recording data and looking for things? And that would be the first question.
As we've gone along and implemented items to date, we've made every attempt, and I think we've been fairly successful in providing the training to those people that need to know it. Before we implemented the CityWorks system, we brought the frontline users in and did training on this is how this works and whatnot. We have had individual, Roy again, has received some modeling training. I think right now I can't say we need this specific training or that specific training, but anytime you start implementing new systems out within your organization, yes, I can see us requiring additional training. Now, whether we bring the trainer here or go to the training or do it online, there's a lot of options.
I know I've attended some meetings where Western Dakota VOTEC, and they are obviously working with their students to provide training that's helpful for young people seeking jobs. And I mean, they're eager to be preparing our workforce. So that would be, one thing to consider. Do you see us needing, I hate to say this word, it's not very popular, additional employees?
I'll let Robert answer that one.
Go to Robert Ellis.
I mean,
I don't foresee a need for any additional employees. We do have an employee, Roy Cork, and you've approved some training for him recently. Roy will be the person charged with maintaining the water and sewer model. He's kind of our resident expert on the city works as well. And so that person is already in place, and I'm sure he's very anxious, waiting for this model to land on his lap and to become the maintainer of it. But as far as additional personnel, I don't see that need, no.
Thank you. That's all the question. Thank you very much.
Do you have something? Robert Ellis?
I did just have one additional comment to make, maybe addressing Mr. Weifenbach's question about the water and sewer modeling. Just so that the council is aware what the intent of that sewer model is from staff's perspective. When a developer comes in and he has big plans to develop his property, some of the first questions they have to answer are, is there sewer capacity? Is there sewer available? And what are there fire flows necessary for me to actually do this development? What this model will do is it'll allow their engineer to come sit down with us. We'll give them that portion of the city model so that they can take a look at it, and they'll put in their land use and what type of buildings are they actually talking about. They'll be able to answer that question rather than everybody standing around saying, I'm not sure, we're gonna have to study this more. The information will be there for their engineer to do that. And then one final comment, if I could. There has been a little bit of a concern from consulting engineers here in town that we'll be taking away their livelihood. We're gonna be the sewer modelist for their client. That's not our intent at all. They will continue to do that water and sewer modeling. We just have information that'll make it easier for them to make those determinations, give more solid answers to the growth management department on whether or not this is a realistic development. So I just wanted to make that point. We will not be doing the water and sewer modeling for all these developments that come in. We're just maintaining and warehousing all this information for them to use and make decisions.
I have a question and then a comment I'd like to make. Everyone seems to be excited about this and where this can take us and what it can do for us. There was a real dollar cost to this, and I'd like to know where the money came from to be able to go out and purchase this expertise to give us all this information. So where did the city of Rapid City get the dollars from?
Yeah, the overall cost for this project from beginning to end is a little over $1.8 million. Of that, just short of $800,000 came through a federal STAG grant, they're called, that's administered by the EPA and the South Dakota Department of Environment and Natural Resources. The other remaining $1 million balance was split equally between our water and sewer enterprise funds. So about $500,000 from water and $500,000 from sewer.
I knew the answer to that question before I asked it, but I wanted it out in the public domain. In part, I can remember Public Works, and I can remember city council members, and I can remember the mayor going to Washington, D.C., asking for money specifically for this sort of thing. So at times we hear that there's not a return on investment for these trips that we take when we go out there and start beating on our federal delegations' doors. You just think that this is important to note as well, that sometimes it yields not only a return on investment, but a huge return on investment that will impact our community for years to come. We're talking about things 2015, 2030. We're talking about things well into the future. And my understanding of what leadership is, I'm speaking now from the council standpoint, is that you do things that are going to impact the community after you're gone. I don't believe, there might be a few up here, but I won't be on the council in 2015 or 2030. Some might, but that'll be some mark that this council has left on the city of Rapid City for years to come. Just a couple comments. I think that this was valuable information, and I too would like to join my colleagues up here in just thanking you for putting all this information together and then presenting it to us, I think, in terms of how we grow and where we grow, and giving us a lot of information to think about in terms of how we implement into the city. One of the partners that I think should be somewhere in this discussion, maybe between step 1 and step 2, or step 2 and step 3, is thinking about emergency management in the city. And I know that kind of came up a little bit, the Pennington County City relationship of emergency management and how we plan and share some of this information with them. And then my last comment will be, I just think that this is very valuable information for our community, and I hope that we understand as council members that at the baseline of this is still that infrastructure of technology that we're gonna have to keep current and in place. And I'm mainly thinking about the infrastructure to provide GIS sorts of infrastructure in place. Because if we don't have that baseline level in place, then none of this works. So, you know, we're asking about more employees, maybe not more employees, but more dollars allocated to those sorts of resources from the community standpoint, in terms of technology and GIS and those sorts of things. I too think it's pretty exciting, and thank you for sharing it with us. Are there any other questions or comments before we close down the information meeting? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We are adjourned.